specific to a consumer demand. So from the consumer's perspective, if I have to look at, the first important thing that comes is a consumer choice theory. What it clearly says is how the consumer will choose in terms of making decisions. How does the consumer behavior based on the preferences for various alternatives come out with? Because every time the consumer is faced with a good set of alternatives of goods and services, now how does the consumer really make a decision with respect to what bundle of goods and services he has to consume? So that is what is the factor that is driving the consumer decision. And the consumer choice theory always talks in terms of what is the kind of satisfaction each bundle of goods and services provide. So he is going to typically go with that particular bundle of goods and services that maximize the satisfaction of the consumer. And that is where we are saying consumer always selects that particular bundle of goods and services which maximize his utility, maximize his satisfaction, and that is what we are calling as the utility theory, typically covering the consumers, how the consumer will really behave based on the various choices that are available, right? So how does he really look at in terms of satisfaction that is provided by each of the bundles? So any bundle of goods, typically the one that gives the maximum compared to the other is similar, is simply preferred. That is preferred. That is the reason we call it as a good. But the more of it, keeping other things equal, the more of it, I prefer more of it. Right? All other things being the same, more is always preferred to the less. That is the reason we call it as a good, and that is what we typically define as the non-satiation condition. So we always look at, from any utility theorem perspective, we are talking about the various variables that are linking the quantities to be consumed, where we are simply saying holding all the other quantities constant, increasing the utilization of the one should result in more and more satisfaction. So more of it is always preferred compared to less of it. That is what we call as a good. But wherever I am preferring less of it compared to more, it is typically a bad. Typically when we look at the garbage, we want the less of it but not more of it. We generally pay for getting less of it compared to more of it. So that is one of the important things. So consumer choice theory simply is relating how a consumer is making his buying, selling, buying decisions on the basis of that combination of goods and services that are maximizing his overall utility, right? Then one other important thing that we really need to look at in this context is the indifference curves. Whenever we are talking about, okay, better let's look at it in terms of two goods X and Y, right? So the customer probably this many units of Y and 0 units of X, or probably some units of X but some units of Y. So probably I can say any combination of these goods X and Y, any combination of this goods X and Y, the consumer is really indifferent. So he is okay having these many units of Y and these many units of X, or even he is okay having these many units of X and these many units of Y. He is having equal level of satisfaction with any of the combinations of X and Y along this curve. But of course, anything above it like this, he is much more preferred. he prefers them much more because they give him much more better satisfaction, whereas any curve like this, he gives less satisfaction to the. But yes, forget about the customer. From any customer's perspective, a combination of this much of y and this much of x, this much of y, this much of x, both of them will give equal amounts of satisfaction. Probably one customer may find this curve much more appropriate to him, some may prefer this may be more appropriate, we'll look at that part. But whenever I'm talking about the indifference curve, the intention is simple. Any combination of two goods, if I'm taking that particular combinations, that particular possible combinations where the customer is completely indifferent, we call those kind of curves as indifference curves. So any curve that is above it, it is much more preferred. Any curve that is below it, it is less preferred, because from the satisfaction perspective, the curve that is above it provides much more better satisfaction to the customer compared to the curves that are lesser or that are towards the left of it. And on that particular curve, any combination of x and y, they are given equal preference. But here, of course, there is nothing that is talked about in terms of affordability. We are not bringing the dimension of affordability in terms of the indifference curve definition. We are only looking at that particular combination which gives higher levels of satisfaction compared to the other, right? So when I bring in the affordability item is what is called as the budget constraint. There is a constraint from a budget perspective which talks about combining the utility with the salary levels. Probably this gives me the best possible satisfaction, but this is unaffordable. It is beyond my budget. If I have to buy these many units of Y and these many units of X, it may be completely unaffordable for me. So that is coming through the budget constraint. But when I look at indifference curve alone, the budget constraint is not coming into picture. It is only talking about those particular goods and services which give equal preference along the curve. And what we generally observe is the indifference curves are always parallel to each other. They are